I'm Josh Christensen, and this is Most Innovative Companies Video Edition. So Yaz Gagne is out this week. You will see her in a few minutes in the interview for this episode. But this intro, you're stuck with me and my musings, which I know everyone's very happy about. And I have a confession to make. So I don't read a lot of books. Well, I should caveat that. I don't read a lot of books outside of work. There's a number of different books I'll have to read for this podcast or a number of the other projects that I'm working on. But that's really more research. It's not really for enjoyment necessarily. I mean, it's really hard to enjoy a book when you're doing it on deadline. I don't really read a lot of novels. Most of the books that I read for work are obviously nonfiction. A lot of books about tech, about business, and they're great books. They really are. We featured a lot of them on the podcast, but I really want to get back into reading for fun. I just don't do it that much. So I'm trying to figure out what kind of novel I want to read next, or even nonfiction, if I can actually just take the time and enjoy reading it. So I need some suggestions. If you have any suggestions, you can slide into my DMs on Instagram or let me know in the comments here. Hell, leave a review on Apple Podcasts telling me which book I should read. I love a mystery. I love a fantasy book. I was really into Lord of the Rings as a kid. That's sort of the thing that I'm looking for. The reason this is on my mind is because the book I read for today's interview reminded me just how cathartic reading a good book can be. So the book is called An Exercise in Uncertainty, a memoir of illness and hope. And it's by our new coworker here at Fast Company, Jon Gluck. Now, Jon is a senior editor at Fast Company now, but he's also worked for and written for New York Magazine, Vogue, Medium, and many other publications. His book tells the story of his battle with multiple myeloma, which is a rare and incurable blood cancer. He was told he had 18 months to live. That was 20 years ago. We get into Jon's family life, the myriad of treatments he's been through, and what the term cancer zombie means. As a reminder, this is an extended cut of this interview that you can only see on YouTube, but we do have a bunch of other content and segments in the audio version of MIC that you can hear on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, or basically anywhere that they put podcasts on an app. There's about 12 that you can subscribe to right now. And also, while you're here, subscribe to Fast Company's YouTube page. You can click it right down there below. And now, our interview with Jon Gluck. I'm going to go on Goodreads and find a new novel.
Jon, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
And your book came out this week.
Comes out tomorrow, Tuesday, June 10th.
Oh my God. Congratulations. How are you feeling about it?
Super excited and equally super terrified.
Yeah, that sounds about right. So we talked about this a little bit in the intro, but I think to sort of table stakes, what is the illness you have?
Yeah, it's I have a blood cancer, alternately referred to sometimes as a bone marrow cancer. Either term is acceptable, called multiple myeloma. Not to be confused with the skin cancer known as melanoma, which many people do confuse it with. But it's a incurable cancer, but one that has fortunately, in my case, been treatable, meaning I will never not have it. But fortunately, I've been in a position where my doctors have been able to manage and control it quite nicely. There have been times where I've been very sick and then I'm treated and I go into a remission and then I'm sick again and I go into a remission. And that's been kind of the story of the last 20 years.
And a portion of your book proceeds are going towards multiple myeloma research, right?
Yes. Yeah. I feel super committed to that and feel like it's something that's tremendously important, especially in the environment we're in with biomedical research under threat. It's really important to me that we do what we can for that cause.
I was thinking this morning on the subway, there's a quote that I'm about to fully butcher by Virginia Woolf where she says, most stories, most novels are about love or war. And illness is such a big part of people's life, but there's no sort of beginning and end that's very satisfying. Mm-hmm. But you've managed, the book is very readable. After your initial diagnosis, when I think at the time you were given, 2 years maybe, the the first person you called or the first thing you did was call into work. Why?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's one I didn't realize, obviously, at first why, but I've had time to think about it now. And I think a couple reasons. One, I think I was trying to create a sense of normalcy for myself, as in like, oh, big deal. So I'm sick today. I'll just call in sick. And, like I have a sniffle or something. And I think that was part of it. I think part of it was denial. I just didn't want to really admit that anything was so wrong that I had to do anything differently than I normally would. And I think part of it was just the strange sense of dutifulness I have sometimes as an individual. I was like, well, I better report to the boss that, I won't be there today, even though I've now just received life-changing information.
It's very honor student behavior.
Yeah, I don't know about the honor student part. Maybe good Boy Scout, something like that. Yeah. But yeah, that's what I did. I was also avoiding calling the people who I knew it would be a much bigger deal.
Yeah, it makes it real.
I was really impressed by the fact that you then called your therapist and set up an appointment. Like, that is like real, like, it's not planning, but it's very smart.
Yeah, I think that was like inching my way along the same spectrum we were just talking about, and I think there were a couple reasons for that. One, again, all the things I said before, I wasn't quite ready to tell my friends or my family, let alone my wife. And it occurred to me, luckily, I guess, that my therapist was sort of the perfect person to talk to first. I had been seeing her for a number of years, so we knew each other well. She knew me and my story very well. And she was also professionally trained to handle something like that. And so that was kind of my interim step between total denial and like getting to a position where I was ready to tell other people. And she very kindly said, of course, come right away and I'll cancel my other appointments and see you. And it was, I was very fortunate that way.
You, you also mentioned having an initial conversation with Adam Moss. You were already working at New York Magazine, but Adam Moss was the new editor-in-chief. Do you have any advice for kind of approaching those conversations in the workplace?
Yeah, so I had been at New York for about a year, and I was diagnosed about halfway into that year. And then when the 1 year mark came up, there was a change of editors and Adam came in. I don't have advice in the sense that I think everybody should do what they feel is right for them. I don't think there's any blanket solution. In my case, what I would say is I was limping very badly and I had a cane and I was going to need to be out of the office on a regular basis to have radiation treatments every day for 5 days a week for thinking back, I think it was 13 weeks in that initial round. So I had to tell him, in this case, whether somebody else decides, whatever someone else decides, like I say, I think, so many complicated factors go into that. In my case, this was before working from home also became a thing. So it's not like I could have faked it if I tried.
Yeah.
I had to be out for several hours a day. So I just sort of mustered up the, I don't know what, courage, something, fortitude, to go and tell him. And, what I remember saying pretty vividly was, listen, I know you have a million more important things on your plate right now than worrying about me, but I need to tell you, this is my situation, da-da-da. And he was extremely kind and understanding and told me that he actually knew somebody who had been through a multiple myeloma diagnosis, which was very comforting to me to know that he at least had some familiarity with what I might be going through. So yeah, don't have advice in general, but that was my story.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I also think there's sort of you mentioned this in the book, right? Which is you sort of have 3 buckets of response people have to your diagnosis. And the first is like, I actually know someone who died from that, which is horrible. The second, the second is, somebody, this is a bucket I fall into, which is bad, but somebody being like, I'm going to help you. Like, here's the number for 5 doctors and here's what you should do. And are you doing X, Y, Z? And then there's the third, which is somebody who's just able to kind of listen to you and be empathetic and say, that sucks. But what kind of advice do you have for someone who's like, responding to, this kind of thing in your life.
Totally. It's a tricky thing, most everybody is well-intentioned, and so whatever people say or do, I understand typically. That said, I'm going to give a never, sometimes, always answer to your three buckets. So, the never is, boy, I just knew somebody who had that and they died yesterday, or I was just at the funeral. I'm going to give that a never. I think it's pretty unhelpful. As sympathetic as I am, I'm sure that person's situation is very painful. Probably the person who just told you they've been diagnosed with the same disease is not the best person to talk to about that. The sometimes, I think wanting to help, again, completely understand the impulse. And I've been on the other side of this myself, so I get it. It's complicated. I'd say the criteria I'd use there after 20 years of dealing with this is, are you offering something that's genuinely helpful and that the person probably hasn't already heard before?
Yeah.
And I think if you are, then go for it. I think, there have been people who I know who said, listen, I happen to know my wife's aunt's cousin's uncle is really close friends with an amazing myeloma doctor at such and such a hospital. If you ever want to reach out to them, I can put you in touch. That's helpful. And then the always category is just, like you say, basic empathy or sympathy. I've been really struck over the years by how powerful just somebody simply saying, I'm really sorry to hear that. Honest to God, those words alone are wonderful, and more powerful than you think they are. One of the first people I told in my office, a colleague I remember very vividly, simply said, you poor guy, I'm really sorry. And that was so moving. And it wasn't even someone I was particularly close with. It was just somebody who knew the right thing to say.
Yeah. I think there is sometimes a fourth bucket. And I found this with my parents when I had a much less serious experience with cancer than you did. The hardest conversation I had was with my parents because I felt the need to comfort them because your child going through something. I was 30 at the time when I was diagnosed, and they were distraught. And so then I found myself having to comfort them. What was the hardest conversation to have? You talk about your wife extensively in the book as well, but beyond Dee Dee, was there someone who was more difficult to have a conversation with?
Yeah, first, I'm sorry you went through this as well. And there's no such thing as an unserious cancer diagnosis. So,
mine was a very silly version.
Okay, no need to compare.
Josh faked his cancer.
Okay.
I did, yeah.
Yeah. Well, you're certainly going to make news with this podcast then, yeah. The toughest...
Yeah, it gets me canceled.
I've been trying.
I would say I guess I'll give you two answers. One is Dee Dee was the toughest. It's like we'd only been married a handful of years. Just as importantly, if not more so, we had a 7-month-old daughter, our first child, and that was brutal. And interestingly enough, Dee Dee, my wife, her father had passed away when she was quite young, unexpectedly, of a heart attack. And she was strangely calm, I think in part because she'd been through something like this before, which on the one hand, I tremendously appreciated for all the reasons you're saying. I didn't then feel like I had the extra emotional burden of needing to handle her upset. On the other hand, over the years, that became problematic sometimes because you also, to some degree, sort of want the other person to freak out,
Yeah.
And, it's like, if you don't freak out, do you not care? And these are some of the complicated emotional gymnastics you wind up doing in spite of yourself with a diagnosis like this. And then after that, I would say, Josh, I'm 1,000% with you. It was my parents. That was absolutely brutal because I knew how badly it would sting for them. And they were great, too. They were troopers. But it definitely had, I write in the book that cancer is a nuclear bomb, not a tactical weapon, in the sense that it has fallout across all areas of your life. And it certainly had fallout for everyone involved. But, my parents, it was tough. I've subsequently found out more of their honest reaction from other people, my brothers and sisters and family friends. And, that was rough.
Yeah.
In the book, you shared that while many people when they get a diagnosis like this, rethink their whole lives. You actually looked back on your life and you were like, I'm pretty happy with my job and my situation and where I'm living. And I guess I'm curious, how has work kind of helped you? Like you've been working this whole time.
Yeah, I mean, a handful of things about that. One is I have been working this whole time. I've hardly missed a day of work, even when I've been hospitalized because of remote work now and Zooming. I just, turn my background off and go about my business. And sometimes people say, oh, that's so brave or courageous or wonderful of you to have worked the whole time. Believe me, it has nothing to do with bravery. In my case, it just sheerly is like an incredibly great distraction. And, pressure and deadlines and all these things we deal with in our business, they were great for me because it was like, okay, whatever the problem is here at work, it's not as big as that problem, and people, of course, often talk about getting that kind of perspective when they've received a diagnosis like mine. And that's absolutely been true in my case. The other thing, as you talked about, Yaz, I've really came to see that I love what I do. And so there was just pleasure and enjoyment in doing the work. And, when you're sick and not feeling well all the time or getting treatment and feeling even worse, pleasure and enjoyment are in short supply. So that was another, part of it. It just became a refuge in a way from cancer.
You can still get burned out, though. You talk about leaving your magazine at some point because you were like, this is really fun. I need a break.
Yeah. I mean, I happened to be working at a place that was extremely demanding, and I had been there for more than 10 years. And as my disease became more complicated and my treatment became more aggressive and the side effects, therefore, were more debilitating, even back at the beginning of my diagnosis, many people said to me, family and friends, well-meaning people, oh, gosh, you really want to work this hard? Stress is bad for you and all that. And I was like, well, stress is bad for you if it's bad stress. Or if it's an excessive level of stress. But as I was saying a minute ago, a certain amount of stress I found really good in the sense that it kept my mind off of my illness. But that reached a tipping point somewhere in my 10th year of working where I was working. And I realized I need a job that's not so demanding minute to minute, day to day.
You also talked about basically, there's a lot of layoffs that happen in media overall, and insurance, employer-based insurance is so crucial, and especially crucial for you to have. So you sort of needed to be ahead of the curve on that, even if it was out of an abundance of caution. You talk a little bit about the insurance battles that you've had, because it's never easy. Anyone
the life insurance one was crazy.
Oh my God, yeah.
So one thing, I'll start by saying that an interesting thing that I kind of represent in a strange way, or I've become an example of, an unwilling example of, is what I call this new category of people I call cancer zombies. And what I mean by that is not people who are half dead and half alive, but people who are half sick and half well. Mm-hmm. And there are a growing number of us because of the advancements in biomedical research and the treatments for many kinds of cancers. Not all cancers, but many. So instead of either you're treated and you survive and you're good to go for the rest of your life, or you're treated and unfortunately the treatments don't work and you pass away, there's this whole cohort of us who are living for really long periods of time with varying degrees of illness and debilitation. Where I'm going with all that is, unless you're independently wealthy, and I'm not, that means you therefore need to work for a lot of years, and you need insurance for a lot of years, even while you're struggling with your illness and your treatments. So yes, that was super important to me. And I had sort of caught wind that the place I was working was getting ready to do some layoffs, some substantial layoffs. And I realized, as you say, Josh, perfectly, like I needed to try and stay ahead of that curve, A, because I was burnt out at the job I was in anyway, but B, I couldn't afford to be without health insurance. My wife was working at the time as well. She's been working the whole time. And we could have, I guess, switched to her policy, but given the magnitude of the expenses we'd be facing, and it turns out something I learned in the book is that the leading cause of personal bankruptcy is unexpected medical expenses. because of all that, we felt like we really needed a sort of belt and suspenders approach, and for both of us to have insurance in case either of us got laid off, because we were both in the media business and layoffs have been happening, as we all know, for many years now at an alarming rate. So there was that. In terms of dealing with insurance companies and the life insurance anecdote I talk about in the book, it's maddening. One of the things I realized in thinking about this is, there's this whole complex bureaucracy we all know about and how frustrating it can be to deal with prior authorizations and mishandled claims. And what I've realized is the system is so broken that what it comes down to is just getting lucky. And what I mean by that is getting somebody on the other end of the phone, A, who will pick up the phone, B, who's a human being, not a machine, and C, who actually, and this is the important part, cares and wants to help solve your problem. Whether that happens or not is just a crapshoot. It's happened for me a handful of times and many times it hasn't. And then you just have to keep going at it. The life insurance thing is they just blindsided us with I'm sorry, we're not offering this type of policy anymore. And they wiggled through some loophole where they could offer us an alternative, but the alternative was 4 times expensive for 1/4 the coverage. And yeah, that's sort of the state of the American insurance industry.
The other thing that is in the book and that I only realized when I got sick, and Josh, maybe you realize, is how much you have to advocate for yourself in terms of like finding the right doctors, and you know what I mean? Like I think when you're a kid, your parents like take you to the doctors and they cure you, and you sort of expect to walk into a hospital and people be like,
it's a weird thing, and you talk about this in your book a little. Again, it's just like John and my experience in the medical system is a lot different than a lot of people from marginalized groups. So that's a whole other layer on top of that. But even within that, it's still, I got diagnosed in May 2020, so it was like mid-pandemic, and so I had to jump through all of these hoops just to get the examinations that I needed because it was COVID, because it was there, and they weren't taking. You need to be like, this is a high priority. This is a thing. And I remember I had to go to an urgent care because I did a telehealth appointment with my general my general
PCP,
practitioner. I took PCP. I know primary care physician, but my mind went to PCP. So I had,
alternative medicine.
That's right. Yeah, big proponent of ketamine. Me and Elon. So I had to go to, and this kid had to be like fresh out of medical school, maybe an intern to examine. I had testicular cancer, and he got so scared when he realized I had a tumor. And I was like, this is not comforting at all. And he was just like, you need to go get an ultrasound. You need to go get an ultrasound. And I'm like, where do I get an ultrasound?
What is an ultrasound?
Yeah, exactly. So so anyways, long story short, medical system is fun.
It's unbelievable how much, and mainly when you're in the medical system, you're at your worst, right? You're not feeling well, you're anxious, and then they put this extra burden on you. In fact, patient burden, that term is something that people talk about a lot in the world of complex diseases because it's just been going up and up. Patient portals push more of the administrative tasks onto you. Insurance companies under profit pressure are making it more and more difficult to, as we just talked about, maneuver their systems. Doctors' offices, a lot of private practices this has been written about a great deal, bought up by private equity and other for-profit entities, hospitals as well. And in turn, they put more profit pressure on these offices, which part of the downstream effect from that is then the doctor's offices and the hospitals put more of the burden on you to handle all of the administrative tasks. So it's a lot of work and, just another of the things that you're forced to deal with when you least want to.
Yeah.
I want to go back to what you were saying about layoffs, which is, I guess what I'm getting at is we're working in a business that has, a constant level of uncertainty. Your illness also leaves you in this constant state of uncertainty. And you write a little bit about studies about coping with this in the book. But what techniques have you found that have worked?
Yeah, so one of the people I spoke to in reporting the book was a woman named Kate Sweeney. She's a sociology professor at University of California, Riverside. And she has made sort of her life's work, to study uncertainty. And she was absolutely fascinating. I learned a ton from her. People hate uncertainty. Humans hate uncertainty so badly that they'd rather get the bad news than keep waiting. So there was an experiment she told me about where they divided people into two groups and told some of them told them they'd either be getting a small electrical shock or they wouldn't. And they waited, I forget exactly how long, but a long enough period of time for it to be psychologically quite uncomfortable. And an astonishing number of people were just like, "Give me the shock." I don't want to have to worry anymore.
It's like the worst version of the marshmallow problem.
Right, exactly. The diabolical version.
Anyway,
It's just made a joke. It's a different thing entirely.
I don't think that.
But in one experiment, you get a marshmallow, and the other one, you get an electric shock.
Yeah.
That's as far as the analogy goes.
Yeah. So she was saying basically, she also told me there are some techniques, to get to your question more directly, that can help with coping with uncertainty. And she's studied this in people waiting for biopsy results, law students waiting for bar exam results, these other high stakes situations. And one of them is simple distraction. It's surprisingly powerful just to literally put your mind on something else. Related, and sort of the best thing she's identified is getting into what people now call a flow state or the zone. And basically that means doing some type of activity, and it's different for everybody, but could be baking, could be knitting, could be yoga, could be, in my case, it's fly fishing. I love to fly fish. Something that's completely absorbing to you so that it crowds out those anxious thoughts for a prolonged period of time, ideally, and also brings all the endorphins and the other good things that happen when you're doing something that you're absorbed in and you enjoy. All that said, Kate Sweeney told me a great story about, she said, she's an expert in this subject, and her friends and other people who get to know her will say to her, "So you're an expert on this, how do you cope with anxiety or uncertainty?" And she said, "Not very well."
Yeah.
And she said, because it's just extremely difficult to do. That said, lest this story be hopeless, she did say, and this really resonated with me, that just knowing how hard it is and knowing that everybody struggles with it can be comforting to people, because you realize, I'm not the only one. I'm not doing anything wrong. This is just the natural state of affairs.
What's your flow state activity?
Oh, cooking. Yeah. Love cooking. You wanted me to say making cocktails.
Yeah.
I do like making a cocktail too.
Yeah.
They're related. They're both chemistry to some extent. No, love cooking, and then video games too. Video games is a good.
What's yours? Yes.
Like running or just doing like a really hard cardio activity, or often if I really need to put my mind on something else, I watch heist movies.
Nice.
Because I want to know how it happened. You know what I mean? Like it
really
engages your
plot.
brain. Yeah, exactly.
My wife's the same way, only it's with like period dramas.
That's funny.
Like she's like, I need to relax, and puts on like Amistad, which is insane.
Televised sports is another of mine.
That's fair.
When I was in the
That makes a lot of
hospital, I
sense.
watched an ungodly amount of televised sports, including
The type of sports that you watch.
it was everything.
Yeah.
It was baseball, golf,
Darts.
not quite darts, but
Cornhole.
I did watch an ESPN broadcast of a cornhole tournament. Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Yeah. I also watched literally every minute of the Tour de France that year. I happened to be in the
That,
hospital.
honestly, I don't know.
For
That
all
might
3
stress
weeks.
me
No,
out
I
more.
can see that. I can see that being good.
It's a 21-day race that takes place over hundreds of hours, and I watched every minute of it. Yep. Joyfully.
Curling's like that. I can watch curling
No.
for hours. It's just
That's too slow.
So
Tour de
relaxing.
France, I'm like, it's gonna pass. I don't know. I will say, and then I'll move on. Yeah. This weekend I did watch Now You See Me and Now You See Me Too, the one where magicians flies.
That's like with Jesse Eisenberg.
Yeah,
and
I'm
then...
sorry. None of it makes sense. I was like so angry.
Well, that's
at
the magic, yes.
No, they explain half the tricks, but not the other half, which drives me crazy. You know what I mean?
Seems
It's like,
convenient from a filmmaker's perspective.
yeah, that's what I mean. They all like jumped off a building. No one told us how.
Magician's secret.
Anyway, now I have more serious question. What was the pandemic like for you?
That was tough. Part of both my illness and my treatment have left me quite immunocompromised. And, it was tough for everybody, and possibly even scarier for those of us who felt like we didn't have much defense against this at all if we were to get it.
And you were in the city, right?
We were in the city. We had no other logical place to go. We didn't want to move in with family and expose them to extra risk. Everyone was trying to keep their bubbles small, and we don't have a second home or someplace we could go to. So we stayed here. We followed all the precautions pretty much to a T. But then, oddly enough, we went back to, living the way most people were living then. We wore masks in crowded public places and in the supermarket, and we tried to avoid going to stores too often. But at some point, I just decided, what's the point of staying alive if you don't live your life? So I didn't make myself a complete shut-in.
Yeah.
I tried to be sensible, but also live my life. One of the interesting things that happened toward the end of the first most serious wave of the pandemic is I wrote an op-ed for the Washington Post about, the title was something like, it's great that everybody's getting back to normal now. Please keep in mind that there are some of us who are immunocompromised who, still need to take these precautions. And most of the comments I got were lovely and supportive, as you might imagine. But then, of course, what I thought was a relatively benign and sort of maybe even kind, I'll go so far as to say, was met with not that response by, some people who, one of the comments I think was, that's the luck of the draw. We don't owe you anything. Stop whining, or what is that
so
effect?
Crazy.
And so, that was not the most pleasant part of my pandemic experience, but here we are.
Yeah, you really saw the worst, the worst of people.
Well, you talked about it like an IRL experience on your way to, I think you were in middle of CAR-T experience in the pickup truck story on the highway where you actually confronted someone who said, I'll let you tell the story. I mean, and so you sort of like lost it a little bit there, right? How much was that building up, and can you tell that story?
I think you put your finger right on it. It's like I did sort of implode or explode, I guess. And
we're all justified recently.
I can't imagine you getting angry.
Well, that's the funny thing. It was out of character, and yet it's a testament to, how difficult some of this stuff is to cope with, that no matter how even-keeled you think you are or you normally are in your day-to-day life, something like this eventually is going to get to you, right? And it's going to boil over. So I was on my way home from I had just received a chemotherapy treatment. I was in a cab on my way home in downtown Manhattan. There was tremendous traffic because there was a parade that day, it turned out. And we were literally inching our way along, at times just fully parked. And coincidentally, a pickup truck pulled up alongside me. I was in the back seat on the right side of the cab, and I had the window down, and I was masked because I was trying to be as safe as possible COVID-wise, and especially because I was particularly compromised at that point. And this truck pulled up right alongside, and the driver looked at me, and he was straight out of Central Casting, sort of looked like, I guess, somebody who maybe was predisposed to this sort of opinion, and looked at me and said, and he had his buddy, his wingman, sitting next to him, and looked at me and he said, mind you, I'm a perfect stranger. He doesn't know me from anyone. And he said, lose the mask. And I was like, I took a beat, and then I was like, you know what? This is a family podcast, so I have...
No, it's not.
I have had it, So because we were all but stopped in the traffic, I literally got out of the cab, took the 2 or 3 steps over to his rolled down window. And at that point, I could see it started to like turn in his head what was going on, because I was almost completely bald. I had a wrap around my arm with an IV that was, permanently inserted. And I just said to him, buddy, I'm on my way home from chemotherapy. I'm going to this is in preparation for a 3-week hospital stay that I'm starting tomorrow, all of which was true. The reason I'm wearing the mask is because I have cancer, and bleep you. And number one, I'm just going to say it felt really good. It was like 20 years of buildup, just, of not overreacting, or even, really expressing too much anger at all, just kind of came pouring out of me.
Yeah.
Two, in fairness, I will say, I have a friend who calls me Mr. Reasonable, so you're right about that. And now here comes Mr. Reasonable coming back. I will say the second he put it all together, he was incredibly sorry. He wasn't like a horrible guy. He was just kind of a low-key jerk.
Yeah.
And he said, I'm so sorry. I obviously didn't know. I'm really, really sorry. Really, really sorry. He kept apologizing. And then funny enough, at the next light, they turned right. And I think they were probably going to keep going. He just didn't want to keep inching along side by side with me and having to
At that point,
see
you
me.
got to be like, I got to.
Yeah, he wanted out.
Yeah.
So that was my temper tantrum.
It's such a crazy story. And it's wild. It's nice that he didn't double down. That's sort of encouraging for humanity, I guess. Yeah. More so people are low-key jerks than outright evil, I hope.
I'm imagining this guy looks like Kid Rock. Anyway.
Well,
I'm not going to leap into any stereotypes.
Where was he on January 6th?
So I guess my last question related to workplace stuff is how important are accommodations like the ability to work remotely for you?
Yeah, it's been tremendously important. One of the other things that is interesting about the pandemic, which you were asking about a minute ago, is in some ways, so I had been living like that on and off for many years. And then in some ways it was like our mask friend aside, our pickup truck friend aside, in some ways, many, if not most people sort of sympathize more with, everybody who has ever been through this and has to worry constantly about germs, And so that was sort of normalizing in a strange way. But the best part was being able to work remotely, It allowed me to keep my job without going on disability. It allowed me to, as I say, keep this constant distraction of working in place so that I didn't lose my mind. It became kind of a lifeline.
How worried have you been? Have you started new jobs and you mentioned some of this in the book when it came to your time at Hearst about workplace discrimination.
Yeah, it's a really tricky question. I'm not the kind of person to sort of knee-jerk, see that sort of thing everywhere. But I've seen it in glimpses. I've had glimpses of it. I'd say a couple things come to mind. When I was getting ready to leave New York Magazine and interviewing for jobs at other places, a recruiter said to me, "Oh, I read the story you wrote in New York Magazine. How are you doing?" Because many years earlier, I had written a short essay about my original diagnosis in the first couple of years of my illness. On the one hand, she seemed like an extremely nice person, and I'm the kind of person who's inclined to give people the benefit of the doubt. On the other hand, I wondered, is she fishing? So I thought she was sincere in her question, but I also wondered, is she fishing for information about my health status so she can figure out if I'm, hireable or a wise hire or not? Right. I'll never know, but that's one of the things that when you're in my position, you wonder about and you have to worry about. Another instance, I would say, that comes to mind is, there was an occasion where I was laid off from a job along with quite a number of other people, but not a huge number of people. And, all of us who've been laid off wonder, why did they decide to pick me and not somebody else who might as well have been laid off? And that's another time I wondered, could that have been a factor? Again, I'll never know. My doctor said something to me once about my primary oncologist when way back when I was sort of speculating about what could have caused my illness. He just sort of, and I was like, well, it could have been this, could it have been that, could have been the other thing. And he literally just said, who cares? And I thought he was sort of had a wonderful, gentle manner. And, another person you might have been like, well, gosh, that's cold. He didn't mean it that way. He meant it very lovingly, as in if you're never going to know, move on.
Yeah.
And I think that's true with some of these cases too. I'm not going to know what the people's true motivations were, so I try to move on. That said, it is a major, serious issue for a lot of people. I'm not here to, again, give people advice or say whether or not you should share, information about your illness if you receive a diagnosis like this. I will say, once you do decide to, there's no putting it back in the bottle. So just be super sure that if you want to share this information, you are potentially opening yourself up to what can be a very serious problem.
Last question. Despite, not the right way to put it, but you've been sick and you've had a really incredible career. And I'm curious how you set yourself up for success as you've navigated things. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, some of it honestly is luck. I'm not saying that to be falsely humble. I think, I've been lucky enough to be able to work this whole time, and there are a lot of people who have what I have or other cancers or other illnesses or other problems of any sort who aren't. So, there's some Yogi Berra-ism, I don't remember it, about just showing up or 99% of, what I'm talking about. So I've been able to show up. That counts for a lot. Beyond that, I would say some of the common things we write about at Fast Company all the time, like I'm a pretty good networker and I've built, I think, a good, network of people who've been able to help me find jobs when I've needed to find jobs or get, another thing is, I try and do a good job. I work pretty hard, and I try and be nice to people. And I'm sure there have been lots of people I haven't been nice to. And there are days where I don't work that hard. But all in all, I try to play by the rules and hope that things will, of course, I'm not naive. They don't always work out for you when you do that. But I think it gives you a better chance if you do that than if you don't.
Not being a jerk usually
that's
good.
That's a start anyway. And then I think two other quick things. One, I mentioned I really love what I do. And so pretty much everywhere I've been, I think that shines through. I hope it does anyway, and kind of lights a fire under me in a good way. And then last is, I hate to give cancer credit for anything good. But I do think some of those things I was talking about before, about the perspective it gives you, it is pretty tough to throw me in the workplace. So I'm good in a high pressure situation. I'm good in an intense, big project that's like, wow, we're going to have to climb Mount Everest to get this done. It's like, dude, this is not Mount Everest. This is like a molehill and we're all going to be fine. We're going to totally make this work. And I think people respond to that. And I think it helps keep me more calm and productive in the workplace. And I think maybe my people I work with have felt that way too. A few of them have told me so anyway.
Well, this was great, Jon. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, guys. I really enjoyed it and really appreciate it.
And we can buy your book anywhere?
Anywhere, Audible, Kindle, hardcover.
Did you read it?
I have not actually reread the hardcover, yeah.
Oh, I mean for the Audible recording.
Yes, I read it for the Audible recording. It was a terrifying experience on the one hand. And on the other hand, it was sort of fun because you're in a recording studio that's similar to this one, but even more sort of rock star-ish. And so It's the closest I'm ever going to come to being Bono. And, I drank it in for those 3 or 4 days, yeah.
Wow, it only took you 3 or 4 days?
Yeah, it was like 4 days plus some corrections of, botches. Yeah, but it's a long 4 days.
Yeah, that sounds rough.
You're there pretty much all day, every day. Yeah.
It's a lot.
Yeah. I have a new appreciation for voice artists, believe me. Yeah.
And you're like, I wrote this. Now I have to read it? Jesus.
It's hard to read. It's hard to read with the right and give things the right the emotional valence you intended. It's also just even physically difficult. After the second day, it was like my vocal cords were tired. I was tired of sitting in the chair.
Oh, yeah,
it's hard work and requires a lot of talent that I don't have. So,
sure you do. It's on Audible.
My publisher was telling me, and I agree with this, that for memoirs, people really like to hear the person who wrote it read it because of the personal aspect.
Yeah.
And I did feel that I enjoyed doing it that way, that I felt like I was sharing something very personal and I guess intimate with people who are going to listen to it. And I did feel good about that part.
Good. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.